Hey guys, today we're going to be learning about histograms. So we're going to underline our definition of a histogram, and that is that a histogram is a type of graph that shows how data is being used using bars of different heights. So yes, we're using bars in our graph, but it is not a bar graph. There are some differences even though they look very similar. The biggest difference is that in a histogram, there are no gaps. So if you look at this example, there is no spaces between the bars on a histogram, where bar graphs do have gaps in between their bars. So over on our notes, in histograms, there are no spaces between the bars. There's no gaps. The second biggest difference is that in a histogram, numbers are grouped into different intervals. Now, an interval is just a different grouping. So we talk about intervals like we can do things in groups of 2 or in groups of 5 or even in groups of 10. So that's what an interval is. 0 to 10 is an interval. So let me just write that down as an example. 0 to 10 is an interval. When using histograms, you get to decide what scale you want to do. And that just means, are you counting by 2s? Are you counting by 3s? Are you counting by 5s? So you get to choose that. Histograms are a great way to show numerical data. So numerical meaning numbers. So that just means it's something that we're measuring. So examples of that are height. You can measure your height, weight, length, and time. Those are all answers that we would get with just numbers. It's not like we're giving an answer of like, oh, I like the color red or I like the color green, but it's an answer of, I am 5'2", or I spent 20 minutes doing my homework. So it's just an answer that is specifically using numbers. Where bar graphs are better to use with the categorical data. And categorical just means using categories. And examples of those are, what's your favorite color? Well, I like red, green, blue. Those are categories of colors. And that's what bar graphs use. What's your favorite movie? What countries have you visited? What sports do you play? Those are other examples of categories that can be used with bar graphs. So the horizontal axis is a continuous number line. So on a histogram, just like we said, because there aren't any gaps, that means that the number line is continuous. It just continues throughout the entire graph. There aren't any breaks in between there unless you don't have any data for that specific number. So the bars of a histogram must have the same interval. So when we're creating our histograms, it's important that they have the same amount of data points within their bars. So if you do 0 to 2, think about how many data points that is. Well, I can have any number that's 0, 1, or 2. So that's 3 numbers. So when we create our next one, we also have to have 3 numbers. So it would be 3, think about 3, 4, 5. So it would be 3 to 5 would be my next interval. So they have to have the same number of data points. The height of the bars tells us the frequency, and frequency is just a fancy word that means how many things fell into the number range. So how many times did you see a number between 0 and 2? Well, if I saw it 3 times, then 3 would be your frequency. And you can figure out the number of data points values in the total data set by adding the heights of the bars. So like we said, the frequency tells us how many items fell into that category, fell into that number range. So if I add up all the heights of my bars, if I add up all the frequencies of my bars, then that'll give me the total number of data points in my data set. So on your next side, we're going to actually create a histogram. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to create our frequency table, and I'll continue this on the next slide.